Okay, then we will start the second part of our symposium on a topic that has a little bit of a different focus, the focus of visibility. So how to make intangible heritage visible, because intangible heritage, of course, is part of society. Many heritage organizations, maybe the ones you're working for, are working on bringing intangible heritage closer to the public and to stimulate to safeguarding by doing research, making an inventory, making it visible in museums or digitizing it. And we will hear 4 examples. The first is from Sara Gonzalez. She's from Spain. She did a PhD in the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage in Spain, and she works as an anthropologist at the Institute of Cultural Heritage of Spain, that is part of the Ministry of Culture and Sports. So Sara, I'm looking forward. You're already there? I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jacqueline. Well, first of all, I want to thank Dutch Culture and the Dutch Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage for having us, for the invitation to participate in this symposium, and also to the organization for their kind and efficient work. Well, in addition to the transformation of the concept of cultural heritage due to the approach to the anthropological concept of culture, in Spain there is a rather particular situation at the level of internal organization. In the Spanish state there are some powers exercised by the autonomous communities, the regions, and others belong solely to the general state administration where I work. In the case of intangible heritage, there are 17 regional administrations and 1 central administration with its own powers and laws, so it was necessary to build a tool that unified the criteria and work methodologies, which were certainly disparate at the time of ratification of the convention by Spain in 2006. The national plans for cultural heritage are management and coordination tools between the Spanish state, the regions, and other public and private entities, which from an interdisciplinary manner try to establish the criteria, methodologies, and lines of action necessary for safeguarding the cultural heritage. Since the first for cathedrals in 1990, 14 national plans for cultural heritage have been generated. The national plan, or the ICH national plan, has a general objective, the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage, and in addition it has 4 specific objectives and methodologies. The first is to establish agree theoretical basis on the concept, characteristics, areas, and so. Prepare projects relating to the identification, documentation, dissemination, and promotion. Raise awareness in society and achieve institutional recognition in the framework of cultural policies. And facilitate information between administrations, since mostly in our case, the treatment of this type of cultural heritage needs so it's proposed in cooperation with regions and other private and public entities. And well, what does the national plan designed by ICH? We use the 2003 convention definition after our ratification in 2006, but in any case, the importance of the ICH, as we understand it, does not lie in the cultural manifestation itself, but in the wealth of knowledge and techniques that are transmitted from generation to generation, as we will see in an example. The national plan proposes a series of characteristics that can serve to identify intangible cultural heritage in the Spanish context. And in the same way, the national plan expanded and detailed a bit the 5 areas of development that the convention proposed.
We're going to talk about the programs of the national plan. And it proposes 3 programs that frame various lines of action. They detail the most suitable methodologies for the development of projects. The first is for research and documentation, as it's the most urgent and important measure for the safeguarding of ICH with the participation of the host communities. And for these reasons, there were the priority projects within the framework of the plan, the research about the cultural manifestation, especially those works that cross-affect various regions or for manifestations that are in any risk. The plan also proposed the 4 fundamental tools for the adequate investigation and documentation of manifestation. The second program is for tangible heritage conservation, as the ICH is interconnected with materiality in a direct way, since it's the physical support for the body of the discourses, and the institution that often works these assets, like museums, archives, documentation centers, must be aware of the symbolic value that these supports present and the particularities of their conservation. And as we set ourselves the challenge of making intangible cultural heritage visible, let me explain the last program in a bit more detail. The National Plan organizes the lines of action of the program for transmission, promotion, dissemination, based on the agents whose mission and commitments include spreading the knowledge about ICH. Starting with community participation, obviously, that is suggested that the development of participation strategies will not be only limited to consultation sessions, but that involve the active presence of the groups in dissemination actions, both at the level of the communities themselves and their respective formal cultural organizations. Museums also often generate knowledge about the processes, particularities and messages of the ICH associated with their collections, and the methodology should favor the coexistence between the internal and external vision, presenting the object simultaneously as an artistic object and as support of meanings. In the case of tourism, taking into account that there's a risk linked to non-sustainable tourism, the plan proposes 2 lines of action for 2 types of ICA assets, artisan goods and collective rituals, which need kind of different approaches, and especially about little-known cultural practices. The National Plan offers a series of guidelines for mass media, among which the need for contextualization, the rethinking of stereotypes, and the guarantee of respect of the population, or the motivation of the dissemination for the community itself. I took a specific project made on the framework of the national plan, the plan for the safeguarding of the Esparto culture. The Esparto culture in Spain is an identifying and representative intangible heritage, but in a situation of extreme vulnerability. The Esparto landscapes, as you can see in the image, are the result of a prolonged interaction between the Esparto communities and the diverse ecosystems since the Paleolithic period. This plant is capable of fixing and forming new soils in semi-arid spaces, which we have in Spain, stopping erosion processes and acting as natural barriers against desertification. The Esparto communities form a rich and diverse society over time, generating a wide variety of specific traits. And in the past they were united, but today those communities are permeable and quite dispersed. Dedicating yourself to Esparto was synonymous with poverty and sacrifice, but currently its protagonists seek to dignify the trade, claiming the public recognition and their valuable contribution on the cultural, social, economic and environmental fields. In the context of technological and economic globalization and an unprecedented climate crisis, the ICH of Esparto Gras, still alive, presents a quick deterioration. It was urgent to implement the strategies of the safeguard plan due to the advanced age of the people who can still transmit their knowledge. The interest is fourfold. First, cultural, because its manifestation must be considered ICH. Economic, because it's likely to generate benefits and economic developments for artisans and companies. Social, because it makes it possible to stimulate employment in rural areas and in a global framework favors the development of professionals in the place of origin. And environmental, because taking care of esparto helps to fight against the effects of desertification and global warming. Now, the plan for the safeguarding of the esparto culture published by my home institute, you can find it online, pursues the survival of the esparto ICH related to domestic and professional spheres in its institutional recognition and the conservation of its traditional knowledge. To achieve these objectives, we have several strategies made up of 25 actions and 110 activities, among which are research, training, articulation of a fair trade market, didactic materials, and so on. And well, in addition to the numerous dissemination actions, the dozens of projects carried out within the framework of this national plan as the best speaker of the principles and values, technical assistance and financing for ICH inventories, specific projects on various topics such as the role of women on ICH, or projects to disseminate the ICH like educational resources, photographic exhibitions. And, well, for the national plan, it's a pride to be able to collaborate with other states in our safeguarding of cultural heritage. And although our contexts are different, the problems we face are sometimes common, so we greatly appreciate the opportunity to share this journey with such relevant colleagues from all over Europe. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Now from Spain we move further up north to Belgium. I would like to ask Freya to give the next presentation. Freya van Krijnest works at Historisch in Flanders, Belgium, where she studies intangible cultural heritage from the 3rd UNESCO domain, focused on festivals, rituals and social practices. And she supports tradition bearers and practitioners in her work. She's also involved in heritage as a practitioner herself.
Yeah. Hello everybody, thank you Jacqueline for the introduction. Thank you also for the beautiful week we are having. It's been a blast up so far, so I'm glad that I can give some extra information on what we do in Belgium. Of course, in Belgium or in Flanders, it's a situation I'm going to talk about. There's a lot of things happening on making intangible heritage visible, so I had to pick a little focus because 10 minutes is not that long. So if I miss something, please don't be offended. Maybe you can ask me some things later on during the drinks maybe, but my focus is going to be on what we do at Historisch. But of course we are part of a bigger ICH network in Flanders. We have an organization like Keen in the Netherlands, also in Flanders, which coordinates everything over the 5 domains of UNESCO, and we have different players on the different domains as well. So we are only playing a small part in a bigger thing of making intangible heritage more visible. Now, as I already said, I'm working at Historisch, and Historisch is actually a service heritage organization. So we are funded by the Flemish government, and actually have a focus on heritage volunteers, which is actually a quite broad understanding on a group of people. In our case, we focus on them because they are focused on the ones, unlike professionals, who dedicate their free time to taking care of heritage. It's out of a passion, out of the heart for the heritage that they do it, and that's the group of people that we want to focus on. In our definition of a volunteer, we also include the ICH practitioners and the tradition bearers, specifically on the 3rd domain. So that's on the festivities, social practices, and the rituals. Our goal for everything that we do is to empower those volunteers. And also in case of visibility, which is a topic here today, is we want to support them, guide them, give them some extra tools so they can make themselves more visible. Because we believe that if we support them, they will support the heritage. So that's the whole philosophy of what we do. Of course, everything, the keyword of today should be bottom-up and not top-down. So that's also the thing that we do. So we focus on those co-creative processes, which is also very participatory, of course, so those two are linked. The guidance and the support that we provide, we do that with a variety of tools that we have in our toolkit, which is actually just a screenshot for our website. This is the homepage, where you can see the different things that we offer. First of all is courses, which is very tailor-made to the specific needs of volunteers. In case of visibility, it's going to be a course on how you can use social media, or how you can connect to younger people to make the ICH more approachable for them. The second thing that we do, and that's actually the thing that I do most, is what we do with the ICH wow, difficult word. The ICH practitioners is the co-creative processes. It's actually tailor-made advice and support that we provide, and most of the time it is linked to a trajectory towards a placement on the ICH inventory in Flanders. What we also do is provide publications, both digital and online, on our website. Digital and online, and also on paper, if they like. We also have databases, which I will show one later on in the presentation. And also we have some extra projects, mostly around some certain themes, also to promote visibility of the work that volunteers do, or the work that volunteers can do in bigger projects, like academic research projects and other things like that. So a few examples, and I'm going to start immediately with a few pictures where I'm on it. It's not because I'm so vain, but it's because I think it's important that we are that we are part of the practitioners and what they do. So the whole idea here in this process with the Historical Shooting Guilds is actually a group of people, a community, a heritage community. It's a very diverse group, geographically spread all over Flanders, but also in the Netherlands and other parts of Europe. Is started in 2017. They wanted to be on the national inventory, which is a big goal for them because it took a long time. So we have a big process, long-term engagement, and it's still going on. So in 2019, they were placed on the national inventory, and until up to date, we're still working with them towards the sustainable safeguarding of their traditions. So it's a process, and I'm so happy to be a part of it. So that makes me understand what they really need, what they really want, what they can achieve, what is maybe a bit too difficult to achieve right now and should be postponed until later time. So it's a very tailor-made process. Something else that we do is we try to voice concerns that volunteers or the ICH practitioners face in their daily work or their daily life, especially if it's not a coincidence that it's a COVID example, because a lot of practitioners suffered also from the COVID restrictions. So we had museums being closed, but of course volunteers also couldn't practice what they really love to do. So here we had some, instead of saying how bad it was for them, we tried to focus on the positive, and we tried to heighten or put a limelight on the inspirational practices. So we made a podcast, and one of the episodes was with Giant Culture in Antwerp, and they did something really funny with mouth masks, as you can see on the photo. But they also decided to come to the people instead of the people coming to them, because that wasn't possible. So it's very inspirational. So we made a podcast out of it, so it could be heard and seen by everybody who was struggling. There's a little message of hope, accompanied by some tips and tricks. So Historis, this is some other episodes, they're all on our website. Historis at this point is kind of a platform, so everybody can find the practices that our people are doing. It's also something that we do in our monthly newsletter. We include testimonials of ICH practitioners, not always ICH practitioners, sometimes there are other volunteers, but the idea is that they can tell what they do. So it's very approachable as well. A broad audience can learn more about the practitioners and what they do in their daily life, what their passion is about. This is one on the fairground culture, which is also now in the process of making a UNESCO filing together with France. Some other things that we do is we try to do some our own research. So we have a lot of research going on the third domain and the traditions included. We want to show it to on our website to a bigger a bigger audience. So it's just not just for ICH enthusiasts, but also people who celebrate Christmas or are interested in what is Holi or Diwali. So it's a whole idea of sharing the information and make it more visible. We completely turned it around, this database. It's quite old yet already. So we actualized it completely, and now we included also the voice of the the ICH practitioners themselves. So we added the category overdragers, which is the icon you can see on the right. It's actually literally transmitting something to someone else, transmitting, and this is an example of it. So we have the grieving culture in Flanders, the 1st and 2nd of November, but this is a whole new take on it. It's the founder of Réveil, which is an organization who wanted to make a bit more of a festival again, instead of the silent, grey, sad happening that it was before. So it's a good addition to the database. Something else that we're doing is actually a quite recent project. We're doing it with a bigger ICH network in Flanders, so it's not just historisch. Yeah, I'm again in the picture, I'm so sorry. It was a candid photo. The video maker didn't know I was there, so it was a bit of a joke. But the idea here is that we really want to put a face on the craftsmanship that is also in the third domain. So it's a bigger project. We're doing it with all the other players, so it's all around the 5 domains of the convention. And the idea is that we document it, and that the result of it is going to be shown in a broad way. So we are going to do it, but it's also going to become on our platform site where also the inventory can be found. So it's a bigger project on showing ICH. In our case, it's also interesting because we want to make shown that there's also a lot of craftsmanship on the third domain of UNESCO. Immediately, craftsmanship thinks to domain 5, but it can also be domain 3, so it's also some kind of awareness that there is craftsmanship all over the UNESCO convention. It's still ongoing, by the way, so the movie will be expected at the end of the year. There will be a congress as well on it. And there is also going to be a toolkit on how we can teach the communities themselves to also document their craftsmanship. So it's not everybody has the budget to hire a professional filmmaker, so that's a solution to that. And then last, but I think not least, is also we have the bigger ICH network. Of course, the different thematic players, but we also try to include network events or network topics, teachable networks on different thematic topics, where we also include the communities themselves. So this is a structural partnership. It's going to be 10 years that we already do things like this together. So it's Historisch together with 2 other professional organizations, which is Parcum, is also a museum, and we have CADOC, which is also an archive, and we come together with all our different expertises to support and to guide the professional, as a professional way of supporting the processional communities who take care of processions. So op handen gedragen means carried. You can see it in the pictures. So the idea here is that we have those network moments where we can also enhance the visibility of processional culture and let them find each other in creating extra awareness about processional culture, the challenges they face. Again, also learning from each other about tips, tricks, things they like to learn more for, and stuff like that. So it's one of the thematic networks that we have. I could go on and on and on, but this is the last slide. So I think if there are questions, maybe you can ask them later, or I can share some more during drinks. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Indeed, there's time for questions after your 4 presentations, and then there's networking drinks where we hope you will join us. It's still raining outside here in Amsterdam, so. But first, 2 more presentations. Next is Jacob O'Sullivan from Scotland. Jacob is Museum Development Manager with Museums Galleries Scotland, the national development body for the museums and galleries sector in Scotland. And Jacob manages the approach to safeguarding and promoting ICH across the museum sector in Scotland, as well as providing support for museums and galleries more generally. So I'm looking forward to your presentation on visibility of ICH.
Thank you very much. Hi all, thank you so much. just to reiterate what everybody said, just thank you so much for inviting us over. It's been absolutely brilliant. Learned so much, and just a pleasure to meet everybody on the programme as well. It's been great. And I keep saying that Amsterdam is my favourite city in the world, so I mean it. It's one. Actually, it was second favourite on Monday, so it's gone up in the world. I should say as well that I feel very embarrassed and lucky that I think I'm the only speaker doing this in my first language, but I can't promise to be any more articulate or anything. So we'll see how it goes. But thank you all for listening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work of Museums Galleries Scotland, and also, I suppose, the situation of intangible cultural heritage within Scotland, and how we've utilised a themed year through the Scotland Year of Stories project, which was a way of us kind of reinvigorating how we support communities and museums. And I'm going to look at a few examples of where this has been quite successful with some of the projects that we funded. But just a bit of a background as to the work of Museums Galleries Scotland. So we are one of only a few key partners in the Intangible Cultural Heritage Partnership within Scotland. So other members include Traditional Arts and Culture Scotland, who kind of manage the approaches to storytelling, dance and music. Historic Environment Scotland, who look after landscapes. Creative Scotland, who manage kind of artistic approaches. And then there's Museums Galleries Scotland, who we're here to really support all the museums and galleries and how they work with communities. We get Museums Galleries Scotland gets a grant directly from the Scottish Government to work with this, but our primary aim is supporting the material culture of museums and galleries. So I'm going to look a bit about kind of how this squares with our support for intangible cultural heritage more widely. Museums Galleries Scotland, we are a funder for museums and galleries, and we also kind of exist to provide advice and to create networks where possible. And in the intangible cultural heritage work that we're doing, we are really trying to foster a genuine role for museums and galleries in supporting spontaneous community expressions and community involvement, especially through using physical museum spaces and physical museum collections as resources for intangible culture and living heritage more widely. So just then to give a bit more context on the kind of Scotland-specific environment in which we're working. So here is a map of Scotland and the museums and galleries and kind of where they're distributed. In 2012, Museums Galleries Scotland became the first non-government organisation advisor to UNESCO within the UK. But of course the UK has not ratified the ICH Convention. So there's a slight kind of interesting dynamic there that we work obviously under the kind of main Westminster government, but we also have devolution within the UK. So Scotland is a devolved nation with its own government, Scottish Government. And the Scottish Government are very supportive of intangible cultural heritage, especially in relation to increasing ideas of place and community and things like that. And I think that's really where there's a strong role for the museums within this as well. We really want to support intangible cultural heritage through all of our existing networks. And as an organisation like Museums Galleries Scotland, the best network that we have is our museums and galleries, which are sort of dotted across the country. And I'll just point out here, if my thing works, or maybe it doesn't. Okay, you can see on the map some of the kind of the challenges geographically and the kind of cultural diversity that was within a really quite small country of 5.5 million people. So you can see that most of the museums and galleries are kind of clustered around the bottom there. And within Scotland, obviously, there's lots of islands. In many of the Western Isles, there's the strong Gaelic tradition, traditional minority language of Gaelic, and actually, I mean, that's spread throughout the country now, with increased representation in the cities. On the East Coast, you have the Scots culture, which is a particular language in its own right as well, and a kind of particular cultural understanding. You also have Highland culture and Lowland culture. urban and rural, and of course lots of the different kind of migrant groups that have settled in the country in more recent years as well. And going way back from, there was strong Irish immigration about 200 years ago, right up to where I live in Leith in Edinburgh. There's really strong Ukrainian migration to that area, and all the kind of different cultural traditions that these groups bring with them can be supported through our museums and galleries. I'm just going to quickly show this just to reiterate kind of where our museums and galleries are. So this is a population density map. So you can see it's roughly reflective of this map here. You can just understand that as soon as you get north and west, it's very mountainous, and there's just not the same kind of population centres. But what this does mean is that almost every physical community can have a fantastic resource for heritage and for living heritage, which is the museums and galleries of that area. Just to look kind of policy-wise, I think that recently we've really increased how we support ICH in terms of the museums that we work with, but also in terms of the Scottish Government cultural plan. And we're really lucky that we are utilising the International Council of Museums definition, which has this kind of key idea of that museums research, collect, conserve, interpret and exhibit tangible and intangible heritage. And that's really important for us because as an organisation which mainly works with museums and galleries, it helps us to kind of get this point across that ICH is just as important as the material culture of museums and galleries. A big challenge that we come across is articulating this to the museum sector more widely as well. We've heard this a lot, but kind of the idea that museums and community groups might say, well, this is just a way of life. This is just fundamental to existence. Why is this a separate kind of ICH, like a cultural thing that needs an acronym or an initialism? And that's a difficult thing to overcome, but I think it's really fundamental to some of the conversations that we've had. And that's key to kind of the next thing that I want to talk about, which is how we dealt with this and how we really tried to reinvigorate an understanding of intangible cultural heritage, both across communities, but also across the museums and gallery sector more widely. As we saw kind of museums and communities re-establishing themselves after lockdown and COVID, we really wanted to have a year to kind of kick that off and re-energize conversations around this. So we have occasional themed years within Scotland, and 2022 was the themed year of Scotland Stories. And storytelling is obviously a really important aspect of intangible cultural heritage, and it's an important thing for our museums and galleries. So we were able to really utilise this themed year as a way of celebrating ICH in museums and reinforcing that idea that they're connected. We did this with funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, so it's funded by players of the lottery, and collaborated with Visit Scotland, which is a tourism body. So it was also about using ICH to promote tourism across the country. I'm just going to play a quick clip of a video which just highlights one particular storyteller and how they worked with an open-air museum called Auchendrain. And I want to include this as well because it's storytelling, but it was also using the Gaelic language, so you get an idea of the Gaelic language that's still a community spoken language in the country. Let's see if this works.
It's very important for me to tell the stories that belong to a girl in the dialect of the area and in a place that represents the kind of environment that my ancestors spent their time in. Well, it's been a fantastic experience because I had a whole load of stories bouncing about my head that I told to my kids and occasionally told at wee gigs here and there. But
so it was a very short clip, but really, I really wanted to highlight that was one storyteller who was a professional storyteller, but he worked with communities to bring them into this open-air rural museum using the Gaelic language as well as a real spoken language that people were understanding. And just to highlight a few more examples through the Community Stories Fund that we were able to support, and we did this through our first ICH officer post as well, my colleague Peter, who was able to support this, which was brilliant. We talk very much about ICH in Scotland rather than Scottish ICH, so the idea that any group that settles in Scotland, their ICH is a national ICH. So this was a project looking at Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities who shared storytelling but also music. And these are distinct communities, obviously, so there was a strong kind of intercultural aspect to that, but also lots of learning from each other, but also these aren't communities which are traditionally well represented in museum collections. And we want to use ICH as a tool for decolonising of museum spaces, but also decolonising of museum collections and kind of colonial era collecting practices. So this is a really important way of, I guess, filling in gaps of representation in museum collections through using intangible cultural heritage that otherwise will have been forgotten and not safeguarded. Similarly, we were able to use storytelling and cooking and kind of have a real social aspect through some of these projects. And just the final example is a really nice one, which is Gairloch Museum, which is a museum in the far northwest of mainland Scotland, in a very remote and rural part of the world. But they did this brilliant ceilidh, which is a traditional kind of often dance and music, but also a kind of storytelling and community event. They're the only museum for 50 miles in every direction as well. So there's a really disparate rural community base there which came together. And the museum literally became a front room for the community. They asked people to bring in kind of homely bits and bobs and just use the museum as a home space to come and tell stories. There was multiple languages there. Gaelic was used there as well. And for these rural communities, often there's no other community space. So the museum is a clear community resource, and it becomes a space through which ICH can be promoted and celebrated and used to bind communities together. And through all of this project, we were able to input onto our inventory. So every single project which was there was able to be uploaded as examples onto the inventory. And again, it's really kicked off this idea of safeguarding through community participation, using the museum as an established community resource, which has been really useful for us and the country. And just my final couple of slides, just to reiterate that from our point of view, museums and galleries are, I really think, really unique in their capacity to support intangible culture. And for us, helping to understand them as physical spaces for community ownership and community participation is really how that is done most appropriately. And thus ends my talk. But thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you. I hope after all this inspiration and very interesting presentations, you still have the energy for the last presentation. Last but not least, for sure, from our neighboring Germany, by Patricia Rijmipour. Patricia is director of the Institute for Museum Research at the Staatliche Museum zu Berlin, and she will tell more about her work. Thank you.
I'm so sorry, I have to drink something. And actually I can just stop talking because Jacob already said everything I wanted to say, but I keep it short and maybe you stay awake. Here we are. Well, right, I'm the director of the Institute of Museum Research, and we are doing a project which is called Materialization of the Immaterial. And what I'm going to tell you with that project is that we step a step back. We are not in the work with the communities at the moment, but we do it in other projects. But what we do in this project is to have this bird's eye perspective on how museums and intangible heritage fit together, because we hear very often that it doesn't fit together, and as we heard by Jacob, it fits together very well. I think so too, but we need data about that. Before I tell you something about the project, which is in this final phase at the moment, I tell you a little bit about the Institute to understand why we do such research. We were founded in 1979 and we are nationwide active. That is very important. We are founded from the nation, from the government, and I put it higher, maybe, like this? Yeah. We are founded by the government and we are part of a big museum collaboration, but we do work for all of the 7,000 museums in Germany, which is a really high amount of museums, and most of them, 60%, are very small museums. And so we do research for the small museums, especially to support them, to do formats they don't do without our help, and we try to conduct research with and about museums. That is very important. So we do it very hands-on together with them. We have focus points in our work, and I don't tell you everything about that, but what's very important for us is that we have topics on the one side we are dealing with, you see them on the left-hand side, and we have knowledge that we bring in. And what we can do is also data collection and evaluation, and that's the project I'm going to tell you about more in a minute. And we have a focus on intangible heritage for the next 5 years, which we found out in a strategic workshop with all the colleagues in the museums and in our institute. Yeah, there's a big project in Germany. It's called Museum 4.0, and this project is on digital formats in museums and how they transfer knowledge to pupils, to grown-ups, to youngsters, and everybody else. And the aims are development of digital offers for the new ways of learning, and also participating and experiencing in museums and doing using the codes for reusing. Also for the small and the middle-sized museums, that is very important. And within this project, we have the materialization of the immaterial, and what we do is we are looking at what museums do have ICH in their collections? How do they collect? How do they provide the knowledge for the users, for the visitors in the museum, but also for the digital users? And we asked, what does that do to the immaterial cultural heritage? Because that is one of the obstacles I hear very often. Oh, well, you transfer it into the museum, you transfer it into a digital format, and right after that, it's not a living heritage anymore, it's dying. And so it's not very useful to have it in the museum. But we want to know, is that really like that? What are the formats they're using? Do they interact with the communities? Do they talk to them? Do they ask, how do you want to collect us your ICH, for example? And so we went on and spoke to 101 museums in Germany. That's a small amount on the first place, but we are just starting off with the project. 101 museums, and we had 2 colleagues doing the work, and one is a social anthropologist, which is quite usual for us, but the other one is a psychologist, because we not only wanted to gain the data from, we give you a questionnaire and after that we stop everything. We wanted to have deep interviews, we wanted to have interaction with them, we wanted to build with them workshops and work together with the museums, not with the practitioners, only with the museums at that first site. Did I say everything? Just have to look. Yeah, and then maybe to the final thing that is important also, because we have we are providing a website which is almost finished. It will be published, I think, in 6 weeks on ICH and museums in Germany from that survey and what it did to the museums, to the practitioners and everything. And it's a growing website, so everybody can bring in their information if they want to, and there will also be a second phase of the whole project where we ask more museums and find out how they deal with ICH. Yeah, here are the first insights on the on this survey we conducted, and well, actually. We have the first results because we weren't, and we weren't sure if we can publish them already yet. But because you have to look at that very, very narrow. You see it here. ICH is part of the museum collections, and then you see objects. What objects? We are talking about intangible heritage. But that is what the museums told us that the practitioners gave to them. And they said, that's part of our work, and we want to have it in the museum, and we want to add stories to that. So the museums of the 101, they have 87 objects. They also have written documents, 78. That is what we saw in a former presentation also that by Agatha. It's very important to have also the written documents that people describe what they are doing and why they are doing it. And you see the generational work also. And they also have audiovisual recordings. It's a number of 69, and they are digital 42, and that is something. Yeah, it can be provided in a different way, not only audiovisual, and they have other collections in the museum. So if you have a look at that 100%, and you see that the digital office is by 12%, and 52 is the collection of stories. That is very interesting here. And 36 is the collection of pictures. So it's something that you don't expect in the museum. And here you have the range of the formats that the museums get and how they use and how they provide the ICH for their visitors. And so you have the collection on the one hand, and then you have how do I provide that for the visitors, and how do I transfer the information about our ICH to the visitors in the museum itself. And that is really diverse. And I didn't translate that, but you have media stations and media guides, which is very expectable, I think. But you also have tutorials, you have homepages that they give on, and a lot of communities said they want to have this Facebook link, nothing more, just the Facebook link, and that is enough for me to be in the museum. So, digital education and communication. We see we have an access to the information and to the objects of immaterial cultural heritage in the museum, also in and outside of the museum. The people access it from both sides, so it's very important for them. You have formats that are on the spot, which means in the museums themselves, but also they're going out to the so-called third spaces, which is very important, and they use a lot social media, YouTube. I already mentioned Facebook, which is more interesting for the elder people because they like using Facebook a lot more than they use other social media, as we experienced. And the using is usually on their own of the individual visitor, but also in a group of visitors. And then we have a lot of information about what are the educational aims in the museums and so on and so forth. And here we have another slide and information about, and I think that is really interesting, what is the interaction between the users and the device. So what are the visitors really doing in the museum? Do they relive it? Do they participate with that? Do they keep that living heritage, in a way living. And we have to dive in here a little bit deeper. As I said, it's only the first slides of the information we just got from the museums, but I think it's really rewarding because we really think that the museums can be a multiplier for ICH, and the museums can help them, and vice versa. It's very important because a lot of information in the objects cannot be found out if you don't have the ICH and the usage of the object and the function. So both need to go together and interact to be a whole in a way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now it's the long-awaited time for questions. So, are there any questions after these 4 last presentation, or to any of our presenters of today?
Okay, I can answer. So, thank you all for your lovely presentations. I was triggered especially by the national plan of Spain and the work that you're doing in Belgium. And I was thinking, like, from the international perspective, if we're looking at it, like, and we're here now in the Netherlands, and thank you also for having all of us here. Like, from a perspective, we're doing all of these things in our own little countries or bigger countries, and at the same time we have a lot of synergy. So Spain this year will be taking on the presidency of the EU, and then next year, first half of 2024, to Belgium. So how will you be passing on the knowledge and trying to also bring this up to a more pan-European stage, which I believe could be very rewarding to learn from each other and also from our differences, but also from what we have in common. So I was wondering if you already thought of something like this, and how if we're thinking of how we can translate our experiences more broadly in fora like this today, but also maybe more generally. So the question is for Belgium and Spain. 12 points.
A question about the European aspect. So how are Spain and Belgium, that will take on the presidency of the EU soon, how will they pass on their knowledge about ICH internationally?
Well, we're making an activity within the framework of the national plan about, I don't know how to say it in English, the structures, elevated structures to put the grain in and to conserve the grain in the fields, which are very useful and usual in the north of Spain. You know, in Asturias and Galicia, they're called hórreos. I don't know if this word says something for you, but it's a model not only in the north of Spain, but in many other places in Europe, for example, Portugal, Croatia, Slovenia, and we're making a professional meeting in the north of Spain with some visits to some hórreos to make an exchange of experiences of conservation and reusing these structures. And I think the European point of view of these assets can enrich the ways of safeguarding that, and in that case, in their very huge amounts of hórreos, I don't know, 50,000 in Asturias and 20,000 in Galicia or so. There are so many to conserve, and of course the knowledge associated to the material assets. And this will be one of our celebrations of the President's Community. Yeah, you're welcome.
A small addition from the Belgian side. I think that when our time comes to be president, I think that the political parties involved will definitely work something out. I'm sure that they will, because we think that international exchange is very important. We already do so, I think, by being here this week, for example. So we try to make the most out of it, and there are already some extra ideas of how we can collaborate together. So I think there's a lot more potential in that. But from my side of the heritage work, what I do with the communities, we always encourage them to also look further away than just Belgium. Like I said, there are some networks already with the communities which are not just Flanders or Belgium, but also include the Netherlands or other European countries. So I think we're already to a great start, and there's only the only way is up or something like that. So yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, go on with the international collaborations, I would say. Any more urgent questions now?
Well, Patricia and Jacob, you work in sort of the same organization, but in Germany you have the treaty that is ratified, but in Scotland not. Could you maybe reflect on what are the consequences of the treaty or the convention for the countries? What if you would ratify and what if you would not have did it? So is it helpful, is it not?
A question about the difference between Scotland and Germany on ratifying, that's the word, ratifying the UNESCO Convention on ICH. First of all, Scotland.
Yeah, thank you. On behalf of the entire country, no, I should say that I should make clear I'm not involved in conversations around this particularly, but I know that there was reluctance from a UK-wide point of view to ratify this. I think for several reasons, but primarily I think some worry over what the wider implication would be in terms of if it would be creating more work, things like this, and if already there was good support networks in existence to support ICH without that needing to necessarily be ratified. And I think that is true. I think there are fantastic organisations, UK-wide as well as within Scotland, Scotland specific, which do a great job of safeguarding and promoting ICH. But maybe just don't use that language, and I think that's true. We've heard that a lot this week, and I think that's true in many countries. And I think it's been a fundamental thing. I mean, certainly looking at, for example, the state of traditional music in Scotland. I mean, it's really healthy. It's touch wood, and it's really a fundamental part of modern life. At many pubs you go to, you'll hear traditional music in and things like this. And I think there's an idea that keeps it spontaneous without a need to necessarily formalise that. However, I know that there are conversations, very real conversations, ongoing around ratification and if it's possible. And I find the conversations very exciting. But that's all I can say.
Yeah. Oh. Hi, I'm Patricia, and we did it. Well, actually, I think it helped a lot. It really helped a lot. Culture is a federal thing in Germany, and there were a lot of people doing a lot in ICH communities, and they were inventorizing, but they were doing very locally. And for example, the institute I work for, we only can help and support when it's ratified, because we are funded by the Bund, and so if we do something for the whole country, we also have to have the argument for doing it. So it eased the work in a way, and I think if you watch the landscape in Germany of that, what was inventorized and people talking about ICH and so on since 2003, it really increased a lot, and not only because the people became interested in it, but also because they had the political support in a way. So do it.
I think we'll leave the other questions, if there are any, to the networking drinks. I would like to thank, first of all, our speakers, the visitors that have thanked us so wholeheartedly all at the beginnings of their presentation, but now I would like to thank them for giving their presentations and sharing their work from 7 corners of Europe with us today. And I would like to thank you for all being here, and of course the people online that have tuned in from different countries worldwide. Yeah, for me it was a lot of inspiration. Personally, I'm not even working with communities or with the visibility of ICH myself, but still I'm very inspired, and I think what came across mostly was the joy that you all have in working with communities, working with ICH, and practicing it sometimes even. So yeah, that gave a really positive vibe to this afternoon. I would like to take the opportunity, because we talked about international collaboration, to share the European Heritage Program of Dutch Culture with you, which I'm managing, and we do have some grants available, a grant scheme and a travel grant scheme that you can apply to set up any international collaborations in the field of heritage in Europe. So as a Dutch-based organization or professional in the field of heritage, you can apply for that. So have a look. To invite you for a drink at the back of this room. We will be here for another hour at least. So I'm looking forward to talking to you. Thank you.